My MIL called me with a secret that will destroy my husband's entire identity and I can't say a word. She grabbed her phone the moment she saw the message. Her mother-in-law wanted to talk. Said it was serious. Said it was important. Said whatever you do, do not tell my son. And what she heard next was about to change everything. She did not know it yet, but in that single phone call, her entire understanding of the family she had married into was going to be ripped apart. The man her husband called Dad. The siblings he grew up with. The history he thought he knew. All of it. About to unravel. So she listened. And by the time the call was over, she was sitting alone with a secret so enormous it had no business being inside one person. Here is what came out. Her mother-in-law sat her down, metaphorically speaking, and told her that her husband's father is not actually his biological father. Not even close. The man who raised him, the man who is listed on his birth certificate, the man her husband has called Dad for 30 years, is not the man whose blood runs through his veins. And it does not stop there. After having her first child, her husband at the time became emotionally cold and detached. It was not a dramatic or explosive withdrawal. It was the slow, suffocating kind, the kind where someone is physically present every single day but feels impossibly far away. He pulled away steadily and quietly, became abusive in the ways that do not always leave visible marks, the kind of damage that happens in whispered cruelties and deliberate silences rather than anything that photographs as evidence. She was left feeling completely alone inside a marriage she could not escape, a marriage that had calcified around her before she even fully understood what she had walked into. Then she met someone at work. Someone she described as a soulmate connection, which is the kind of language people use when they want you to understand that it was not just a fling. It was not a meaningless affair born out of boredom or recklessness. This was something that felt real and consuming and impossible to walk away from, the kind of connection that makes a person feel, perhaps for the first time in years, like they actually exist. She got pregnant. Her husband, the one at home, the one who had grown cold and distant, never suspected a thing. He had no reason to. From the outside, the family looked intact. And so her second child came into the world carrying a secret that only 2 people on the planet knew, slipping quietly into a family portrait that had no idea it was already a fiction. But then it happened again. She got pregnant by the same man a second time. The man at work, the biological father, he was also married. He also had his own children, his own front door, his own life that was entirely separate from hers. And so they made an agreement, spoken or unspoken, to keep every single piece of this buried, to lower it into the ground together and never speak of it again. The biological father was not completely absent, though. That is one of the most surreal details in this entire situation, the detail that sits in your chest like something you cannot quite swallow. He showed up at the hospital after each birth. He came into those rooms, which smell like antiseptic and new life and the particular kind of exhaustion that only new parents know. He came. He saw the babies. He held whatever version of that moment he allowed himself. He knew they were his, knew it with absolute certainty, and looked at those tiny faces carrying his features and his bloodline. And then he walked back out into his own separate life and left this woman to raise 2 of his children inside a marriage built on a lie that was holding the whole thing together with whatever thread she had left. He returned to his own wife, his own family, his own routines, and those children grew up never knowing his name. She stayed for reasons anyone who has ever felt financially trapped inside a bad relationship will recognize immediately. No money of her own, no savings quietly accumulated against a rainy day, no family member with a spare room and an open door. No support system waiting for her outside that front door. No clear exit that did not feel like walking off a cliff with 2 small children in her arms. The math of leaving did not work. So she stayed. And the years passed the way years do when survival becomes the only goal, one at a time, each one looking more or less like the last. And the secret stayed buried so deep that it calcified into something almost indistinguishable from the truth, at least on the surface, at least from the distance everyone else was standing. And now here they are. More than 30 years later. Her husband's dad is elderly, medically fragile, a man who has lived his entire adult life in the sincere and unshaken belief that 3 children are his. He built his identity as a father around that belief. He measured himself against it. Her husband has lived his entire life not knowing that the man who taught him how to ride a bike, who came to his school events, who sat in the uncomfortable chairs at his performances and graduations, who walked beside him at the moments that mattered, was not biologically connected to him at all. He has 30 years of memories built on a foundation that was never what it appeared to be. And the only person who has just been handed this entire detonated grenade is a 29-year-old woman who answered her phone because she thought it might be something minor, something about the holidays or a birthday or whether to bring dessert to a family dinner. The reason the mother-in-law chose her specifically, is not random. It is not some sudden crisis of conscience that arrived uninvited after 3 decades of silence. It is because of the DNA test. She and her husband decided to do one of those ancestry kits, the kind that have become completely normal and casual, the kind that sit next to the coffee maker, the kind people do at kitchen tables and announce the results over family dinners like a fun piece of trivia about themselves. The kind that are absolutely going to show that her husband's genetic ancestry looks nothing like what he was expecting. Nothing like his older brother's results. Nothing like the father he thought he came from. The numbers will not line up. The percentages will tell a story that no one in that household has ever told out loud. The mother-in-law panicked. And instead of doing the hard, honest, overdue thing and going to her son directly, sitting across from him and taking responsibility for the choices she made and the life she built on top of them, she called the daughter-in-law and asked her to carry the weight instead. That is the part that deserves to sit with you for a second. She has had 30 years to find the courage for this conversation. 30 years of watching her son grow up, of watching him become a man and build a life and choose a partner. 30 years of knowing that somewhere out there is a man with his face, a man who came to the hospital and walked away. And when the moment of reckoning finally arrived, she handed it to someone else. She outsourced the hardest conversation of her life to a woman who had been in the family for a handful of years and had not asked to be anyone's confessor. I need to pause here because the audacity of that phone call is genuinely something else. She went online and looked at the biological father's Facebook page. And the resemblance is, in her own words, uncanny. She sat there staring at the profile of a stranger and watched her husband's face look back at her from decades of someone else's photos. The curve of the jaw. The shape of the eyes. The way he holds himself in pictures. Suddenly all those years of her husband and his younger sister looking so different from their older brother made perfect sense. She had probably noticed it before, in the vague, abstract way you notice things you cannot explain and then quietly file away because there is no category for them yet. The way a family portrait sometimes has one face that seems to belong to a slightly different story. But now the explanation was sitting right there on her screen, a stranger's face that looked like the face she woke up next to every morning. And the weight of that moment, of seeing the biological father and recognizing her husband in him, that is not something you can put back down. It does not work like that. Once that image is in your head, it does not leave. It recontextualizes things. It changes the texture of ordinary memories. She was walking around her house with this enormous secret pressing on her chest while her husband moved through his day completely unaware, pouring his coffee, answering his emails, living inside a version of his own history that was about to be quietly, irrevocably dismantled. He had probably already forgotten about the kit. People order them and move on. The results just show up one day. She felt, and rightfully so, completely and utterly stuck. Because the mother-in-law did not just share information. She swore her to secrecy. She begged her not to tell anyone, especially not her own husband. And that is where this situation becomes genuinely impossible to navigate, because what is being asked of her is not a small thing. She is not just holding a secret. She is holding her husband's identity. his entire sense of origin. His medical history, which belongs to him in a way that has real and practical consequences. His relationship with the man he calls Dad, a relationship that will be forced to find a new shape the moment the truth surfaces. His relationship with his siblings, who may or may not already know. The whole structure of his family. All of that belongs to him. All of that is his to process and reckon with. And she is being asked to carry it silently and alone until a mail-in DNA test does the work that an honest conversation should have done 30 years ago. She knows the results are coming. She knows that within weeks her husband is going to open an envelope or click a link and see numbers and ancestry percentages that do not add up. He is going to feel confused at first, then curious, then something colder and harder as the picture starts to assemble itself. He is going to have questions. He is going to start finding answers. And when he gets there, the truth is going to land on him without any preparation, without any context, without his mother sitting beside him and taking responsibility for the choices she made and the decades she spent protecting herself at the cost of his right to know himself. He is just going to find out. Alone. Through science. The human cost of that possibility is what makes this story so heavy and so hard to sit with. A man in his 30s, finding out that the dad he loved and grieved and had a complicated or close or difficult or tender relationship with, is not biologically his. That the younger sister he grew up beside and argued with and shared a childhood with shares a different father entirely. That somewhere out there is a man who knew, who came to the hospital, who looked at him as a newborn, and walked away and said nothing for 30 years. That his whole origin story, the one he has carried inside him without ever examining it because why would he, is something entirely different from what he was told. That kind of revelation does not just create questions. It dismantles the internal architecture of a person. The way they understand themselves in the world. The way they understand where they come from. The things they thought were certain and permanent. The sense of groundedness that most people do not even know they have until the ground is gone. The identity crisis she anticipated for him is not an overreaction or a dramatic projection. It is the only logical response to that kind of floor giving way beneath your feet with no warning and no one there to catch you. Now let us talk about what she should actually do, because this is not a situation where there is a clean answer that satisfies everyone. There is no version of this that does not hurt someone. But there are versions of this that are more honest, more fair, and more respectful of her husband as a full human being who deserves to know the truth about himself. The mother-in-law made a choice when she picked up that phone and called her. She chose to involve her. She chose to make her a participant. And by doing that, she transferred part of the moral responsibility whether she intended to or not. She cannot tell someone this information and then simultaneously demand they act as though they do not have it. That is not how conscience works. That is not how marriages work. Asking a wife to keep something this fundamental from her husband is asking her to participate in a deception that directly affects him, to look him in the face every morning knowing something about himself that he does not know, and to choose his mother's comfort over his right to understand his own life. The path forward, as hard as it is, involves going back to the mother-in-law and making it clear that silence is not something she can sustain. Not because she wants to blow up the family, not because she does not feel for the position the mother-in-law is in, not because she does not understand the fear behind that phone call. But because her husband deserves the chance to process this before the DNA test takes that choice away from him entirely. The mother-in-law needs to hear, plainly and with compassion, that if she does not find the courage to tell her son herself, then the DNA test will tell him for her. And that version is so much crueler than the truth delivered with love and context and an actual explanation from the person who owes him one. This is one of those situations where doing the right thing and doing the easy thing are not the same. The right thing is advocating for her husband, gently but firmly, and refusing to be the holder of a secret that belongs to him. The easy thing is staying quiet and hoping the DNA results somehow do not say what everyone already knows they are going to say. She already knows which one she can live with. And deep down, so does the mother-in-law. I caught my boyfriend faking an entire marathon and he still won't admit it to my face. He sent her a photo of himself with a medal around his neck. Big smile. Race finished. Message that said he had just crossed the finish line of a full marathon. And she knew, in that exact moment, that he had not. She had been tracking his location the entire time. She had watched him stop at a charity headquarters 2/3 of the way through the route and stay there for 45 minutes. She had the screenshots. She had the timestamps. She had everything. And he was standing there with a medal, lying to her face through a phone screen. Let us go back to the beginning because the setup of this story matters. They had been together for 6 months. In that time, this marathon had been a major recurring topic. Not just something he mentioned once in passing. Something they talked about regularly, almost ritually, the way couples talk about the things that define who they are trying to be. She watched him train for it. She heard about the long Saturday runs, the sore knees, the mornings where he almost quit and pushed through anyway. She helped him raise money for the charity he was allegedly running for, meaning she sat with him while he crafted the fundraising page, encouraged her own contacts to donate, and put her credibility behind his cause. She supported him emotionally through the whole preparation process, which is the kind of involvement that makes this not just a lie to her but a lie that she actively participated in building. She was not a bystander. She was a co-architect of the story he told the world, and he let her build it on a foundation he knew was hollow. When race day came, she could not be there in person. So she did what any supportive partner would do. She asked for his bib number so she could track him online. Her parents went in her place. 2 generations of people who cared about this man and wanted to see him succeed showed up at the finish line to cheer for him. Think about what that means. Her parents got up early, drove to the race, found a spot along the course or near the finish line, and stood there in the crowd, scanning faces, waiting for someone they loved their daughter enough to show up for. That is the scope of what he was asking people to believe in. Not just her. Her family. When she went online to track him about an hour in, his name was not registered. She gave him the benefit of the doubt and assumed maybe he was running under the charity's name. She switched to tracking his location on his phone instead. She was sending screenshots to her parents so they would know roughly when to expect him near the finish line. She was actively coordinating a celebration for a man who was already in the process of deceiving everyone involved. She was the logistics coordinator of her own humiliation, and she did not know it yet. And then his location stopped moving. Parked at the charity headquarters. 45 minutes of nothing. She probably stared at that pin on the map for a while, willing it to move, refreshing, telling herself there was an explanation. And then suddenly, a photo with a medal and a message saying he had finished. I am sorry, but 45 minutes at a charity office and then a medal is not a marathon finish. That is a pickup. She called her parents at the finish line. He had not crossed. She messaged him. He told her it had been too busy, too crowded, that he had not seen them, and that she should just tell her parents to go home. Go home. After they got up early and drove out and stood in that crowd for him. After she had been tracking and coordinating and messaging and believing, refreshing her phone every few minutes like someone waiting for news from a hospital. Just tell them to go home. The casualness of that instruction, the ease with which he asked her to dismiss the people who had shown up for him, should have been its own kind of answer. She sat with it for a while, still trying to give him room for explanations. Maybe he pulled out halfway through and was embarrassed. Maybe something happened physically, a cramp, a knee, something that forced him off the course, and he did not know how to say it without feeling like he had let everyone down. People do that. People sometimes choose a lie over a vulnerable truth because the vulnerable truth feels unbearable in the moment. She was still trying to find a version of events where he was a flawed but essentially honest person who had panicked. But then she did some further digging and found out the actual truth. He had not even attempted the full marathon. He had run as part of a 5-person relay team, meaning each person covered roughly 1/5 of the route. He ran a fraction of the distance, collected the relay medal, sent her a photo, and let her and her parents and everyone who had donated money to his fundraiser believe that he had completed 26.2 miles. He did not stumble into a lie out of embarrassment. He planned to be there, ran his small portion, picked up that medal, and made the choice, deliberately and in full awareness, to present it as something it was not. She has known this for weeks. She has not brought it up yet. And I understand exactly why, because she already knows what is coming. He is going to double down. He has shown her who he is in this moment, and she already knows that confronting him is not going to result in him breaking down and being honest. It is going to result in a wall. She is sitting with information that changes everything, carrying it alone, probably replaying moments from the past 6 months and seeing them differently now, the way you read a book after you know the ending and suddenly every sentence means something else. The thing that makes this worse than just a lie about a race is the fundraising. People gave money. Real money. To sponsor him running a full marathon. Not to sponsor a relay leg. Not to support a team of 5 people taking turns. They gave because they believed he was doing the full thing, the hard thing, the impressive thing. And he let them believe that. He wrote the fundraising page, or sat beside her while she helped write it, and he watched donations come in from people who trusted him, and he said nothing. He cashed in on the goodwill of people who trusted him and then did a fraction of what they paid for. That is not a white lie. That is not an exaggeration. That is fraud-adjacent behavior, and that deserves to be said plainly. The detail she included about past lies, small ones about insignificant things, that is the part that should be hitting hardest right now. Because the small lies and the big lies are not separate personality traits. They are the same trait at different scales. The person who lies easily about small things when the stakes are low is the same person who lies easily about big things when the ego needs protecting. Those small lies she noticed and maybe filed away, maybe half dismissed as quirks or insecurities, were not isolated incidents. They were practice. They were the same muscle, just at lower weight. She has been watching the pattern without recognizing it as a pattern, and this marathon is just the first time the stakes were high enough to make the pattern impossible to ignore. What he was protecting here was not even something worth lying about. Plenty of people run relay marathons. Plenty of people sign up for a full and then have to pull out halfway through. Neither of those things is shameful. People would have understood. People would have still been proud of him. A relay is still a physical feat. A DNF after 20 miles is still 20 miles. But he did not just quietly pull out and say nothing. He fabricated a finish. He accepted a photo with a medal. He told her to send her parents home so they would not realize he had not crossed the line. He maintained the lie actively, in real time, with deliberate choices at every step, while the deception was still happening around him. That is not embarrassment driving someone to protect themselves in a vulnerable moment. That is a person who is comfortable with sustained, deliberate dishonesty. There is a difference and it matters. She asked whether it is worth continuing a relationship with someone who can lie this easily, and I think she already knows the answer. The fact that she framed it as a question suggests she is still trying to find a reason to stay, which is completely human and understandable, because 6 months is long enough to build a life around someone, long enough that the idea of their absence feels like a loss even when they have shown you exactly who they are. But let us be honest about what she has actually observed here. 6 months in, this man lied to her, to her parents, to everyone who donated money, over a race. A race. Not a scandal, not a secret, not something that would have ruined anything if he had just been honest. He chose an elaborate, sustained deception over a simple truth, because the simple truth would have meant admitting he was not as impressive as he wanted to seem. She deserves someone who tells her the truth when the truth is unflattering. She deserves someone who, if they fail at something, comes home and says I could not do it, not someone who stages a finish line moment and sends a fake victory photo. The marathon was never really about the marathon. It was about what kind of person he is when no one is checking. And she was checking. And now she knows. She needs to have the conversation. Not to give him a chance to explain, because there is no explanation that changes what he did. But to say out loud that she knows, to stop carrying the weight of a secret that is his to own, and to make a decision about what she does next based on his actual response. Because his response to being caught is going to tell her everything she needs to know about whether there is any version of this relationship worth salvaging. My guess is he doubles down. My guess is he makes her feel like she violated his trust by tracking him. And if that happens, that is her answer. Walking away from 6 months is hard. Walking away from a person who can look you in the eyes and lie without flinching gets harder the longer you stay. Drop a comment and let me know which story hit harder for you, because both of them left me genuinely speechless. And if you made it this far, a like and subscribe would mean everything.